Hop Podcast. Let's go.
You're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land. His job was to dispose of enemy personnel. To kill. Period. Win by attrition.
All right.
Let's rock.
Let's do it, man. Now, let's see. There we go. Awesome. And welcome back to another episode of Secure That Podcast. With me today is Daniel Carcillo, former NHL player, survivor, and thriver. Somebody that knows intimately what it's like to live with TBI. Our communities are linked together in this, horrible, tragic thing that we endure when we're following our passions. And I just want to take a moment to highlight your story, my man, because you're somebody that has lived it and overcome it. And that's something that is missing. We talk about all the things that happen to us neurologically, but then it's easy for us to think that, well, we're just no coming back. When in reality, for a lot of us, there's a lot of interventions, a lot of resources out there. So thank you for being here today and struggling with me while we got this thing going today.
All good. All good. Glad the power got back on.
Yeah. So tell us, man, about your journey. How did it start? And what are some of the things that helped you when you were going through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm able to be in a place in my life right now where I'm a well person. I have been for almost 4.5 years. Feel very grateful for lessons learned, for the injuries, for everything that's happened to me from a, physical injury standpoint to emotional. Trying to come back from traumatic brain injury induced symptoms when medical professionals are kind of throwing their arms up after 4 years and saying, I think you've tried everything and you've got to get used to living a new normal. That's really hard to hear, as well as, all the fear that goes along with being hit in the head and then possibly having, a neurodegenerative disease or symptoms like that at the age of 30. And I just, like my career, never took no for an answer and thought that I was going to find something that, as weird as it sounds, retiring early from the NHL at 30, 164 fights, 7 diagnosed concussions, like this, I felt like this was going to be my life's purpose, which is like solving this issue for myself and then hopefully for others. And so when I say I'm grateful for, the hits and for everything that I've been through, the peaks, the valleys, there's a long journey, but, it's been amazing now, right? For the last 5.5 years, it's been by far the best part of my life. I'm able to enjoy my kids and I'm able to be really present in my relationship with my wife and with my family back home and with, people that I choose to let into my life. I'm very diligent with that and where I put my energy and trying to just, be the healthiest version of myself so that I can attract into my life what I want, which is for people to hear this message, just to get other people better, so, and it doesn't really matter what arena, right? I talk to a lot of veterans, obviously talk to a lot of athletes, talk to a lot of executives, talk to a lot of first responders, talk to a lot of just civilians that have fallen or that have been in car accidents. And, the message is always the same. And the way that they come to this, what got me better, is usually kind of a last ditch effort after you tried a lot of other things. And just grateful to, have a following, be able to have a platform to be able to be heard.
Yeah. And I want to take it back to something that all of us in special operations can identify with. We tend to think that TBI is something that happens. It's a penetrative injury. But for a lot of us, it's the concussive blast. It's the concussions after jumps. And it kind of just piles on until finally, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And now we're not understanding why we can't function the way we used to. We can't talk the way we used to. And then we throw every possible resource and try to get every sort of help we can, because all we want to focus on is like, I just want to go back to the life that I used to have. I just want to get back. And we don't reflect. We don't pause and say, okay, right now I'm not at my best. Right now I'm going through a really difficult period. And we don't look at the possibility of hope. We fall into this pit of despair. And when you were going through your journey, what was that like when you first started noticing the cognitive decline, the cognitive difference?
It was really scary because when I chose, and it was my decision to leave, it was predicated off of my friend Steve Monador passing away. And this was my last year in the NHL. It was 2014, November the 24th of 2014, my son was born. And I kind of put one foot out the door because I didn't want to be an absent father and be away 186 days of the year. And then Steve passed in February, and me and him had been talking a lot about his symptomology and how to get better. And because during the lockout year in 2013, we actually went to a place where it was like a stroke rehabilitation brain injury place where we would work on like vestibular ocular training and these types of things. And it helped a little bit, you know, and sorry if you can hear my, my little girl, Edith, out there.
No, that's perfect.
Moving around. And so while I was in my career and he was, you know, telling me about the things that he was doing, he was actually going to ayahuasca and going to Peru, and he was starting to kind of scratch that surface of these neuro benefiting agents that are natural. But I saw a lot of the same symptoms in myself that he was experiencing now that he was out of the game. And I just remember, you know, when he passed, I was just very spiritually devoid of any more energy that I could put into the game, to be honest. And I really didn't like how our Players Association didn't support him. And he just felt like he was really on an island. And I got really angry. I got really frustrated and sad. And that's really when the despair started to sink in. And then I got my 7th diagnosed concussion in March, which the symptoms were brutal. And I toughed it out and wanted to be there for the guys and be around the room and go on another run. I didn't play again, but I just remember after that, I wasn't myself. I was, as you mentioned, I just felt very disconnected. And I was very much starting to isolate. For example, I didn't go to the banner raising. I just kind of cut everything off. And that's one of my things that I did when I was depressed or when I was feeling bad. I would go inward. And I love being alone. I like being alone, but to a fault, right? Like you can, you know, I believe there's a difference between, you know, being alone and being lonely. But at that point I shut everybody out, and even my wife, you know. And then when I stepped away from the game, like when you don't have a purpose and you can't go to the rink and you can't be around the guys and you can't do the thing that you know how to do, and then you're just so lost. I was so lost. And then on top of that, you have to learn how to transition into the real world.
Exactly.
Because hockey is not the real world. What you did was not the real world. And you start to realize like, wow, things are so much slower here. You start to have conversations with neighbors that are like, well, how's the weather today, Dan? You know, and it's, you know, I couldn't do it. And then, you know, you start to try to focus on other things and you realize that your mind is just racing in a million different directions. And you are trying to search for who you are, which is very difficult when I was dealing with light sensitivity, slurred speech, headache, head pressure, insomnia, impulse control issues, like tons of stuff. And then that persisted for all those symptoms for like 4 years. I was doing things to try to manage them, but I was also, you know, I was using alcohol. There were pharmaceuticals that were being prescribed to me. There was, you know, there was weed. There was a bunch of different things. And I got to a point where it was very dark in like 2019, where I had tried everything, man. Self-deprivation tanks, hyperbaric chamber, putting, mox acupuncture all through my brain and skull, and like these week-long retreats and cranial sacral and the concussion clinics that were all cash, and I just lost hope because I thought I tried everything. Unlike veterans, like I had all the means in the world to and I'd spent $500,000 of like cash, like of my own money.
Damn.
Because insurance doesn't cover a lot of these things, right? They're alternative treatments. And so, I believe there's no coincidences in this life if I look back to it now. And it was when I was at my darkest, I was on Twitter and social media and really attacking the NHL and like mad at the place. And I was very much in a victimhood mindset. I was very much, which I try to snap people out of, because yes, I was sick, but I was blaming everybody else. I was blaming the league. I was doing everything in my power to not look internally and realize that I was making myself sick by surrounding myself with like these groups that all they do is talk about CT and their symptoms. And
negative echo chamber.
Yeah. And I look at it now and I'm like, wow, I need to help people snap out of that. And when I snapped out of it was when I accepted this invitation to a farm in Colorado, and I almost canceled the flight the next day. Like I just almost didn't go on because there was a piece of me that knew, like, man, you're probably going to get better. And it was a study that I saw in 2017. It was done in 2014 of the brain on psilocybin and not on psilocybin, and these brain hemispheres. And by that point, I was very well read. I was listening to all these medical professionals, and I saw this. I'm like, wow, those are connections being made. That's what these doctors were telling me they could do in these clinics. And this might work. And it was natural, which I really liked. And so I got on at my darkest. It was 3 or 4 weeks where I was planning to end my own life. I didn't view it as selfish. I viewed it as I was going to unburden everybody around me, because people were, you know how it is. People start to kind of walk on eggshells around you and they don't know what you're going to say. And, it can get pretty dark. So you'd rather be alone. You'd rather go to bed at 4 a.m. and then wake up at 4 p.m. to just, not feel.
Yeah.
And for some reason, man, I got on that plane and I took a very, very high dose of mushrooms. And, when I got there, they were like, we're going to do mushrooms for you because we can tell that you're, and I was like, this is what my face looked like. Like if I looked at all the pictures, I was just like,
Yeah.
And, I was like, great, let me get the beer. Let me go grab an Uber and grab the cigarettes. And they're like, no, man, it's a little bit different.
It's medicine, not a recreational drug.
Yeah. So we're going to do it therapeutically and we're going to help you through it. And you're probably going to have a really hard time, because you're suffering, you're suicidal, and you're going to meet that head on. And I was like, great, whatever, man, hands are in the air, surrender. And man, it was 2 hours of the hardest hours of my life, dry heaving, purging this energy, yelling outside, what is this? And then being kind of stuck on this farm with people I didn't know other than my former teammate, and being in a loop, in this negative loop, which was my life. And I just remember, like, I love mushrooms because, they make you kind of suffer enough until you just have this thought. And the thought was, well, you can just stop walking around and just go sit down.
Yeah.
And that was indicative of, you could just stop attacking the league. You can stop indulging in those negative echo chambers in those chat rooms, and you can just change the way you think and feel. And we're going to help you. This medicine's going to help you. And then bam, everything just kind of opened up, and it was blissful for about an hour. And then I just remember waking up the next morning, and I describe it as feeling the way I should, similar to what you just said. It was like, oh, Oh yeah, I remember like feeling somewhat normal before I was 16, before I started taking all these big hits,
Yeah.
you know, and I wanted to get up and I wanted to call my wife, and I just felt immediately more connected to myself and to life. It's, I mean, it still amazes me, you know, what this medicine can do for people and for me. And yeah, pretty blessed. It's been 5.5 years. I just did another ceremony not too long ago in Oregon. We can
Yeah.
legally do it now in the States, and I just continue to kind of peel back the onion, you know, and expand not necessarily my consciousness, but expand the way that I can think about communicating this
Yeah.
to other people, because it's really important to me that other people, number one, see that they may need it, and then number two, give them the confidence enough to come in and try it and try to communicate something that's so hard to describe.
Yeah. It's very difficult to try to explain to individuals that grew up during the, the DARE campaign era that psilocybin is not this evil drug that's going to destroy your life. It's the actual opposite. Well, and I was in that same camp. I didn't understand it. I grew up being told that all these compounds were gateways into prison, into losing your life. So we immediately run towards Western medicine. We immediately run towards things that don't actually help us. I met a lot of individuals, myself included, that when we were pumped full of all sorts of different drugs, one thing, it might have helped with this one thing, but then it exacerbated this other thing. And now we're on 5, 6, 7, 8 different drugs, and we're no closer to finding any sort of peace and calm or being close to solving the riddle of what's going on with my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then we sit down, like you said, we allow ourselves to break down and forget who we are. Professional athletes and soft professionals, you've worked your entire life to get to the elite of the elite. And now you want to sit down and be angry and be spiteful and tear everything down. And woe is me. And there's no possible hope for getting better, which leads you to think that suicide is a viable option. You think the world won't get better, when in reality is, yeah, you might not be the same person that enlisted all those years ago. You might not be the same Green Beret, SEAL, Ranger, football player, NHL player, but that doesn't mean that your life's over. You just need to find the resources to help. And the fact that we're now able to get plugged into clinical trials, being able to go to places like Sunstone Therapies and be able to say, hey, I'm a prime candidate. Let's try this. Yeah. That is amazing. We weren't there a few years ago, but now we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Manish, Kim Roddy, Sunstone, Robert Kaufman, who I've worked with, who's been on my board. They do some pretty amazing work there. It's a great clinical trial site. And yet, to your point, having this tool now that isn't necessarily a Band-Aid, isn't trying to take away symptoms, more so trying to solve why the symptoms are there in the first place.
Yep.
And I'm blown away at how remarkable nature can be. And this confirms to me the questions that I ask, which I've always kind of asked. I'm just a very, I don't know, I would think about things that normal people, I don't think about, which is like, where do we come from? Where do we go? What is this all about? Where do we go when we sleep? Why can't I remember, my first 3 years on this earth? Like, just silly stuff like that, which it's not silly to me, but because, that allows me to kind of get more comfortable with the unknown. And it's remarkable to me that in these altered states of consciousness and with these medicines that come from nature, they heal us spiritually, and then they just know exactly where to work in Denny and then in Daniel. But we're taking the same mushroom or the same drink of ayahuasca, but it has this intelligence where it just knows where to heal us, which is fascinating to me. And there's parts of this that I don't think need to be described or understood. You know, I think a lot of neuroscientists in the Western world tries to figure out, well, which receptors it working on, and if we don't know that, then we can't promote it. But it's great that there's these statewide programs as well as the clinical trials that are open right now and retreat centers. And to your point, it's really hard to be somebody that had so much purpose on a team, very high operating, and then be so hurt that you got to tell somebody, and you have to just, eventually suffer enough to ask for help. And, luckily, I'm sure that you've had a lot of guys come to you, and you're an example of this. And, it's wonderful when somebody comes and says, hey, I can see how you were. I can see how you are now.
Yep.
How do I get a little bit of that?
Yeah, it's that little bit of vulnerability that everybody, especially males, like men, we're really hardwired, and we grow up thinking that vulnerability is a sign of weakness. There's no room for it. But then in reality, when I look at my life, when I look at the healing, nothing happened until I was vulnerable enough to say, I'm not okay, and I'm about to do something really stupid. And that opened the door for everything that helped me. And being vulnerable with our stories of not only how we got better, but how things fell apart gives somebody else the ability to say, you know what, like, if I'm able just to share a little bit with somebody, maybe they can get me help. I think that's the greatest thing. And now more than ever, advocacy at every level. You don't even have to have a show, a podcast, a national audience. You just have to be vulnerable enough to show others that there's a way forward. There's a way to get better. And that's something that all of us need to talk about, because when it comes to TBI, like, we're not going to get to a point in our society where we're not going to have athletes. We're not going to have pro athletes, and we're not going to have professional soldiers. So as long as we have those professions, individuals are going to continuously put themselves at risk, and they're going to get to the point where we were both at, where it's just like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not the same person, and I'm fucking terrified.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's extremely important to not only talk about the wins, but talk about, how dark it was, so that others who may be listening to this will see it, recognize that, I hear myself in you, and that's happening to me, and then reach out, and it's funny, in the team dynamics that we were both in, like, there was a lot of times where you don't necessarily say it, but where you need to be supported by other teammates, and it happens often, so it's my life's work now, to just try to talk to as many people as I can, to, open up as many avenues as we can to allow for somebody to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help. I'm not at my best. And, I'd love to try to explore how to get better.
Yeah. In your own life nowadays, looking back, how are your personal relations improved now that you're, 5 years into this journey?
So everything starts with me, first of all, right? I always tell a lot of people, and my wife will confirm, that I'm the most selfish individual on earth, because I have to be, everybody looks at hockey as a team sport, when in reality, I had to have all of my things together, right? You sign individual contracts, you don't sign team contracts. You're into a team, but I'm one small part of that team. I'm one of 25 guys. And if I don't play my role, which is very individualistic and nuanced to me, right, then I'm not going to, number one, make the lineup, and I'm not going to have an impact. So I always had to have my stuff together and be ready for the opportunity. And that's no different in life. And now that I'm more connected, which I was immensely disconnected, couldn't have been more disconnected from my family, from my kids, because I was so hurt, because I was just dealing with, a good day would be 5 to 10 symptoms.
Yeah.
A bad day is 15, which I had a lot more bad days than good. And when you're dealing with that, you're just very much in your head and walking around, tense, and your energy's off, and people can see that. And so now it's so different, to the point where I have a year old baby, and all she wants to do is be around me, and my youngest, my other three kids, just I can have conversations with them, like, face to face. And if one of them, like, looking them in the eye, and if one of them came in my office, like, sometimes I used to get mad if I'm on a Zoom, and now I know what's important, and I'll just say, hang on, stop the Zoom, and
Yeah.
look over and just have a conversation. But also, that they need to respect boundaries, etc. So the fact that I'm as present as I am with myself, as connected to a mission, I know exactly where I need to be and what I need to do every single day. I'm very physically fit, spiritually fit, and mentally, I'm by far the best I've ever been. That allows me to enter into any relationship or conversation and be extremely connected. And it's almost a curse, because it also, being so conscious and present, also helps you identify who you don't want to be around.
Yeah.
And if people aren't growing around me as I'm growing, because I'm trying to learn and I'm reading and I'm studying every single day, then some people get kind of left behind, and that's also okay. To take people, I'm learning how to, in relationships, how to keep people kind of at arm's length, as opposed to just cutting them off if I don't think that, and just accepting them for who they are.
Yeah.
And loving that part of it. And so it's been an interesting journey, and the more that I prioritize, like, my physical wellness, which is working out. If I say to myself the night before I go to bed, 7 a.m., I keep that contract. It's 7 a.m., I get up. If I don't, then there's that shame and the guilt. And when I'm doing these things, and I'm making sure I'm running and lifting and biking and eating well, and of course I'm human, and you have your cheat days, etc., because the pendulum swings pretty hard if you don't.
Yeah.
Then I'm living a very good life, and yeah, just very, very grateful, very blessed to be able to be like this, be so present in everything that I do. Pretty cool.
Yeah. That's something that a lot of us don't understand how important. We live, and we're constantly projecting to the future for the next game or the next mission, or beating ourselves up for past performance, and we never tap into the present. The importance of faith is something that I took for granted. I just thought that every once in a while when I'm in trouble, I would pray, but then I realized that it's mind, body, and spirit. You truly have to be connected at all three. When you were finally out of the darkest moments of your life with these challenges, how did you reconnect and tap into that final realm, into that spirit?
Yeah, it's a great question. So faith is something that is interesting to me, because I grew up as an altar boy, and so we grew up in the Catholic Church, and that foundation, I think, is amazing for a young man or young girls. And then I kind of spiritually evolved into asking questions where religion is its own kind of beast that I'm trying to figure out. I believe in a higher power. I also believe and feel that women can have kids and we can give life, and so there's this element of is God working through me, as a kind of reflector. But I've always had, with hockey, you have to have this, and I've described this before, this blind faith. This innate confidence in yourself and in your abilities, and a blind faith that if you are presenting yourself in the situation and preparing for the situation, you can't necessarily know when that opportunity is going to come, but you have to have that blind faith that it most certainly will, kind of the door will crack open, and you just have to be ready to step through it. And if you're not, then that's where the shame, the guilt, all of that comes from. So I have this sort of way of thinking now, because I've been shown this in some of these ceremonies, where, you know, being very spiritually and physically and mentally fit, like when I was in my hockey career, if I'm doing the workouts, I'm showing up to practice every day, and I'm not boozing too hard, and I'm doing all of the things necessary for me to be ready for that opportunity, that I will get rewarded. And when I do get rewarded with the door opening, then I just have to be ready. And that's that blind faith aspect of constantly working out and just hoping, knowing, understanding that if you're doing this, that the opportunity will arise for you to prove yourself. And, you know, in professional sports, there's just not much margin for error. And if you get that opportunity and you're not ready, you may never get it again. I've seen guys, and I've been one of these guys, where I've had 2 or 3 bad practices in one bad game, and they're talking about trading him within 7 to 10 days. So that's, you know, a serious, that's the type of, I wouldn't call it stress, but those are the types of environments that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have this, again, it goes back to this kind of self-confidence, with the way that you build that self-confidence and the way that you feed the fire, so to speak, is by getting in the gym, is by being the first one there, being the last one, getting on the ice first, shooting more pucks than anybody else, and getting off the ice last, and saying no to the club, saying no to the temptations. And I wasn't perfect at it. Towards the end of my career, I got really good at it. And these are all just kind of evolution. So, you know, blind faith and faith in general is very important to me, but I think of it very differently than, you know, I made a post today, I called them God winks. Mm-hmm. So, you know, when you're talking to somebody or you're in a group setting, and all of a sudden 3 people, I made a post about this today, are like, oh, I'm from Pennsylvania. And when the other person, there's 4 people on, and the other person's like, oh, so am I. And then the other person's like, no, me too. These are complete strangers that are coming to a mushroom retreat. And that's a God wink to me. It's like, all right, like, thank you. I know I'm on the right path. So I see those all the time, and call it God, call it whatever you want. I know that there's something bigger than me, but I like to think that I'm able to influence it by tapping into you know, consciousness, or I like to think that I have the ability to make that connection stronger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I feel once you tap into it, once you get back and you start working that muscle memory of whether it's, you know, saying the rosary every night, going to church, going to mass, once you make it a part of your life, you're open to seeing those little God winks. You're open to seeing all the little ways that you're like, man, I don't have an answer for this. And you'll be reminded real quick when the right thing pops up. You're like, oh, there it is. That's the answer.
But then you have to be conscious to see those things, right? You have to be present.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And so how do you be present? Well, don't indulge too much in the things that make us disconnected, which pharmaceuticals, synthetic medicine, alcohol, bad food, processed food, ways that we think. Like these are the types of things that rob us of being connected to then seeing the God winks, to then understanding and feeling and knowing that we are in the right place at the right time and that I should keep going. I'm
Yeah.
on the right path. And they also help us to have these aha moments when we know that we're on the wrong path. And,
Yeah.
you're like Alan Watts says, you're under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. We can change immediately. And anybody can do this. We all have the power to do this, and
Yep.
it's something that I've kind of been working out in my own head and trying to understand my life, because I can see a lot of moments where I was able to rely on this inner self knowing and confidence. And sometimes I get amazed at how I was able to capitalize on that. And it's also, there's parts of it that it's okay not to know.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know why I have such a great life. I sometimes can't put my finger on it, but I know that I worked really hard for it.
Yep.
And I'm going to continue to work really hard. And I know if I am not thinking about money and then helping people, as opposed to helping people and being of service, and then the money's always there, it always comes where I can feed my family.
Yep.
Those are really important things to me. And then I think these things are different for everybody too, right? They're probably different for you than they are for me. And it's not right or wrong. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I implore people to kind of find out what works for you, and then
Exactly.
and just do it. Like,
Yeah.
just do it, and don't feel bad about it. As long as you're not running over people and taking advantage.
Yeah.
So
In this second chapter of your life, with this new purpose, this new mission, when you look back, like, where did that first thread for this new passion start? When did you realize, like, okay, this is my next calling?
when I got better, when I was shown that I can take this medicine, these mushrooms, and I can internalize and look inward and gather the strength to see everything that's wrong with me, and then come back out of this altered state of consciousness, into this body, into this reality, and then do something about it.
Yep.
Like, it's one thing to be shown what's wrong with you in an altered state of consciousness and feel exactly what you need to do, and then it's another thing to put it into practice in this body, in this life. And I just felt really blessed that I feel very grateful that I have had the strength to apply myself to something that was so hard for so long. 12 years is a really long time to play professional sports, and it sucked for a lot of the time. It really did. Like, it was like, I think back to how hard it was and how monotonous it was, and how many hours and losses and pain and suffering that nobody saw.
Yeah.
You're not doing that in front of 21,000 people. It's a very, very small portion of what people were actually able to see. But that's the part that I loved about it, the grind, and just how unique it was that only 700 or so guys were doing it every year. And so I feel really, really grateful that I grew up in a kind of environment where it grew me to be able to handle that type of stuff, and to be able to handle that type of pain and that suffering, and then to be able to get so hurt during all the glory days that you look back on, and then to be able to survive when I really wanted to leave, and to be able to have the strength to see this through to get better, and then to be able to carry this message in a responsible way, I'm blown away. Like I'm constantly thinking about kind of why me, right? Like why
Yeah.
didn't Steve make it, or my other friends who've passed away for various number of reasons. We all had hits to the head. We all were making bad decisions. I numerous times over, I shouldn't be here, but I survived. And as you said in the beginning, I am thriving now. And now I got to be responsible. I have to cherish what I have. I have to be grateful, but then I also got to keep pushing the envelope. I got to keep getting better. I got to keep showing how good of a life you can live if you can just have the courage enough to see what's wrong with you and use this medicine to your advantage. And it's working now. I'm seeing a lot of these miracles or God winks happening in my life the last 4 months. And I knew this year was going to be like a good fucking year. And it's been pretty amazing so far.
That's the beauty of it, man. Like understanding being of course, like it's always better after you make it through the firefight, after you make it through the deployment, after you make it through the hell of recovery. But it's amazing to look back and reflect on the pain, on the hard days, on the hard times, and be able to say like, man, yes, it was worth it. I wouldn't go back in time and change anything. I wouldn't go back in time and push Denny to do X, Y, or Z. Just understanding that that's part of the journey. You go through it and you come on the other side and you can finally say like, oh man, okay, all that trauma, all that pain, I can still use it to help others. That's the beauty of it. It doesn't just stay within us. It doesn't just die with us. It now gets repurposed to be of service to somebody else. Because there's tons of people out there.
It's beautifully put. And when it sounds like you've arrived at a place where you understand that everything is necessary. And but you're in a place that's, it sounds very similar to me, where I'm just really comfortable, and I'm, and I know myself, and then you're grateful for the suffering, you're grateful for all the shit, and all the wins, but mostly for the failures, because that's where you learn the most.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful place to be. Yeah. Congrats, man.
Dude, same to you, Daniel. Thank you so much for making time and being here with us today, being a champion and advocate for those that are still in the fight, and knowing that there are resources out there, real medicines that will soon, hopefully, with the way the legal battles are going, that will soon be available to so many of us. Real quick, if you wouldn't mind plugging some of the places that work for alternative medicine.
Sure. Yeah. So I went to Tarapoto, Peru, high jungle, to do ayahuasca at La Medicina. And if anybody is interested in that, there's an organization that connects people and veterans, first responders, their family members with psychedelic assisted therapy. It's Heroic Hearts Project. Jesse Gould, they're great. No Fallen Heroes, Matthew Wiz Buckley. He's done a lot of really great work with like the Mission Within and Ibogaine in Mexico, Costa Rica, and they're trying to end veteran suicide as well. They connect veterans, first responders, and their family members to psychedelic assisted therapy. And we're also doing some work here in the United States. So we're doing a lot of work in Oregon. So we're setting up retreats. Oregon's open for business, Measure 109. We're hopefully going to have our clinic open here in the next 30 to 45 days. And part of the social equity plan is to work with these veteran organizations and vets and first responders who can't really afford kind of that ticket price. And we'll work with them to get them at cost, and just to get, healing, get as many people to try these medicines as possible. So, and yeah, there's 27 other states that have some form of legislation in the works. And so there's a lot of, obviously pharmaceutical companies that are working on medicines that'll be hopefully covered by insurance and the VA. So it's an exciting time, and if people need to know and understand and get a little bit more comfortable over the stigma, go to Johns Hopkins Center for psychedelics and consciousness. Roland Griffiths, Fred Barrett. Roland's obviously passed, but Fred Barrett's great. Matthew Johnson's great. All the work they've done on Alzheimer's, major depressive disorder, end of life anxiety with cancer patients, and just go and read, how much better these medicines are than the standard of care that we have right now, which are SSRIs and antidepressants. These work 4 times better than that standard of care. So, yeah. And, if anybody needs more information, I do free webinars every Thursday night at 7 p.m. where we answer questions. And they're always, if you want to join the broadcast channel on my Instagram, it's called The Crew. I always put the Zooms in there. If you want to send me an email or a DM, Daniel Carcillo 13 on Instagram. And yeah, just, continuing to try to spread the message and try to, get as many people healed as possible.
Absolutely, man. Again, if you want to look and find all this information, just pause the episode and go to the description. All those things that Dan just mentioned will be right there. Dan, again, thank you so much for being here today, brother. And hope all you out there are listening and enjoying. And if you need help, reach out. We're here for you. Until next time, take care. If you like what we're doing and you're enjoying the show, don't forget to share us, like us, subscribe, and head on over to our Patreon where you can be part of our community and get access to all of our episodes as soon as they drop. And remember, we get through this together. Take care.